We haven't received any apologies this morning, but I am aware that there are a number of colleagues that are running a little bit late. They will join us as soon as they arrive. Item 3 are declarations of interest, and members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. Are there any notices of interest? Des?
Not an interest, Chair, but just so that everybody is aware, I was previously an employee of Senvias, but I am not involved in Hackney for 6 months.
Thank you, Des. Any other register of interests? No, thank you very much. We're going to move on to item 4, which is our action notes and action tracker. You'll have copies of that in your meeting pack. A lot of the action notes will be picked up throughout the meeting, and we do need to agree the notes that we have in front of us from the formal meeting held on the 7th of September. Everybody happy to agree those? Thank you very much. I'm going to go swiftly on to item 5, and I'd like to introduce our guest this morning, John Coughlin, to our meeting. After the issuing of the statutory direction, John was appointed Commissioner to oversee improvements to the Council's provision of SEND services following the joint Ofsted and CQC revisit that took place in May 2021. We have circulated John's report, which sets out the findings of his first review, making a range of recommendations for the improvement of SEND services in Birmingham. And I do hope that members have had a chance to have a look at that. I've invited John to give us an overview of his role as a DfE appointed Commissioner, to provide us with some information in relation to the role and remit of the Improvement Board on which he is Chair, and what he believes is required to drive the continued improvement work that he believes necessary. And John, I'm going to hand straight over to you now.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. I understand I'm going to try and take you through the headlines of my role and my work so far with colleagues in the Council. And I'll do that very quickly, but it'll take 10 to 15 minutes even to race through it, so bear with me as I go. And I'm very, very happy to take questions and comments afterwards. Feel free to interrupt me, but it'll take us longer, obviously, to get there if there are interruptions. So, as the Chair has explained, my role is on behalf of DfE. It's a ministerial appointment under statutory direction, so it's quite a formal and intensive process around government intervention. The context to that is, as the Chair has said, a report from Ofsted and CQC, but there's a deeper context to that because there was an original inspection by Ofsted and CQC of SEND in Birmingham, which came to an unusually large number of priority actions out of that inspection. It was a very, very damning inspection in 2018. The worst of those inspections tend to include 3 or 4 priority actions. The Birmingham inspection included 13 priority actions, which is exceptional. The issue, the follow-up inspection in 2021, which was the stimulation for the government intervention, was that Ofsted and CQC found that only one of those priority areas had been reasonably, if not properly, addressed. So that was a very, very serious situation. And I do think, without dwelling upon the past too much, but it's really important still for the Council to understand the gravity of the circumstances of services for special educational needs and disabilities in Birmingham. That's the context within which we think. As the Chair explained, the first stage of my role is to do what's required, what's described as assessments and diagnostics. So basically to take a sense of what the circumstances are. My background is primarily in children's services and in local government, and I was a previous chief executive of a local authority as well. So I'm steeped in children's services and local government. And that's why I assume the minister appointed me. That was some ministers ago, though, I have to say. The assessments and diagnostics phase is not a further inspection. It's a given that the Ofsted and CQC judgment is accurate, but there's a dimension of reviewing the elements of that. But it's particularly about trying to understand why the services were in sustained failure. So remember, it's not about a failure, it's about sustained failure, I'm afraid. I published the report with DFE. Actually, the report was concluded in February of this year, but we agreed to hold off because of the implications politically of publishing a report in the pre-election period. And that was a mutually agreed position, although I know it was a sensitive position to agree. So it was published in May. I'm going to run through with you now some of the headlines of those findings because they're still pertinent and we're still working on them, and then pick up some points in concert with the Chair's introduction around how we're moving forward from here and the role of the Improvement Board in particular, because I know that's of particular interest to the role of scrutiny in any local authority, and that's quite understandable. In headline terms, what I found is that the Ofsted and CQC assessment is accurate. And what you have to understand out of that is that you're talking about at least 4 or 5 years of sustained unsatisfactory performance in the delivery of SEND services in Birmingham. It's a very, very serious situation, and recovery is also extraordinarily difficult for all concerned. So I've kind of endorsed those findings based upon what I've seen so far. I do want to stress you've got really good people trying really hard. And it's so important to remember that at all times. And my report is actually a pain not to draw fingers of blame, because there's no point. It's such a complicated scenario, politically and in officer terms. The issue is our efforts need to be in what do we need to do to reconstruct the context as well as the services, because the services failed within a context as well. But you've got good people to help with that. Another point that I've made in terms of the strategic concerns which have contributed to the sustained failure, and most of you know this, but it's important to state it simply, is that there's been a lot of instability, and there's a simple statistic which talks to the instability within which SEND is trying to improve, which is in the 8 years since the Kerslake report, the last kind of equivalent external review of services, such that was a more corporate piece of work, but a kind of a seminal moment. In those 8 years, you've had 9 chief executives and 9 equivalents to the directors of children's services. And on one level, you can stop there with the assessment. With that level of instability at the leadership of services, you're not going to get anyone. And so one of the points I've made, and I'm really, really pleased the council's made progress on this level since then, is you've now got a substantive chief executive and a substantive director of children's services, whose role also is commensurate with the statutory definition of the role, because the DCS is a statutory role. And now you're compliant there now in a way that you haven't been for some years. And I think that's terribly, terribly important and very, very positive. I've made some comments in my report about the place of children in Birmingham. We might want to talk about that in more detail. I know that's an issue which is going to be of concern to the Scrutiny Commission. Again, I mean that not with regard to blame, but I mean that as an outsider's relatively well-informed judgment about how well the council has been able to fulfil its responsibilities about prioritising the needs of children in their round in accordance with the Children Act 2004, which is still the live legislation, and lead partnerships with children. It's the priority, particularly on children in more need. And obviously in a city like Birmingham, where you've got such a significant number of children in high levels of need and deprivation, a significant and important element of the role going forward. My report talks about weaknesses in the corporate systems, which I think are a symptom of the inconsistent leadership. So what that essentially means is that when you know you need to get something done as a senior officer in the council, it's really hard to see it through. I think that's improving by the day, I'd say that as well, because of Deborah Cadman and her team coming to grips with some of the corporate systems, which just need to become better business systems. And I think that's progressing, but it remains a significant challenge to get things done as quickly as you need to get things done. And that would apply, for example, still, I'm afraid, around recruitment. I've also made some comments about the political culture within the council. And I know that leading politicians have disagreed with me about some of those comments, and I respect that. I'm one person coming up with a judgment, but I should have said at the beginning, this is about the 8th intervention like this that I've done, having been involved in the leadership of services at local government across the piece for some many years. I think there are issues about the tone and balance of officer-member relationships in the organisation, which I think need further work. And again, I'm really pleased that Deborah Cadman and the leader appear to me to be taking that seriously and working post the election at ways and means in which the council can stop and take stock on the way in which it works. I would add to that, I still think it's an issue. It's a complicated cultural issue to take on. My sense is, and I'll be very honest with you about this, of the sense of adversarialism, which I know is needed in the check and balance that exists within a politically accountable organisation, but which I think needs to be rebalanced in Birmingham going forward. And I know that's going to be a controversial issue, and I'm very happy to take further questions about that. The report talks at length about service-specific issues, including particularly, and the board has been wrestling with this for some time. It's making progress, but it's still an issue. But in any SEND service, many of you will know, but just to clarify, the role of what's called SENAR, the Assessment and Review Service, is like the front door. It's the assessment bedrock of the role of the local authority. And it was completely broken in Birmingham. And the experience then for parents and carers in trying to deal with the council, in trying to see where their children were at and what was happening with assessments, what was happening with reviews, that experience has been dire for many parents. Parents are getting children into school, the school performance with children. I've seen some fantastic schools. It's been an absolute privilege to walk around them and to meet with head teachers and to meet with direct carers and health colleagues. But the sense of engaging with the service through SENAR has been brutally hard and difficult for parents on a number of different levels. What that's contributed to as well, which I know has been an issue for elected members, and we've had some discussions about this in different fora over the time, is that there's been a high level of complaints from parents, arguably not as high as you could have had given the state of SENAR. But actually those complaints in many respects aren't actually complaints. They're questions, they're queries, they're people wanting to know what's happening with their child. But the only way they can assert the questions as things stood with SENAR was to do it by complaining. And that's raised the ante. It's brought in councillors who are concerned on behalf of their constituents, who are raising their questions to interim managers and interim officers who are trying to fix the service, but then trying to deal with the questions and the complaints. And so they're not fixing the service, so more complaints come through the door, and you've been in quite a vicious cycle. There is work going on now in SENAR to fix it. More still to be done, including about permanent leadership of the service, which is extraordinarily important. Other key areas of practice and engagement include the real problems that Birmingham has had with home to school transport. I'm sat beside the person who's sorted that for the time being. It is an interim sort, but I do have to say to you, I think the performance of home to school transport in the past critical 6 weeks or so since the start of the new term, compared to where you were at last year, is frankly remarkable. And it's a really, really good news story, and shows that when the city takes its mind to make improvements for these very vulnerable children, it can't half do so. And I think you should be really, really proud, if I may say so, of that repair work that's being done. But of course, it now has to be sustained. But the data on the improvement in that service is extraordinary, and congratulations to all concerned. And I know you're talking about that later on today. I know members want to talk about SENDIAS, and I'm quite happy to do so as well, but I will make some comments now before I conclude on the way forward about what we're working with regard to SENDIAS, and we can return to the conversation as you see fit, Chair, and as members see fit. The first thing I'd want to say about SENDIAS in Birmingham is quite a curious episode. It's the first thing I'd say. I've spoken to several former Director of Children's Services and current Director of Children's Services colleagues, directors of outstanding services, and I've asked them about their Sendias services, and they've not known what I was talking about. Now, that's not a criticism of them. It's that actually Sendias is a really important but quite niche service within the overall Send performance. Sendias in Birmingham has a particular profile. I'm not interested in excavating that, but it's really interesting it's got such a high profile. What we knew when I was doing my review, and you'll see it outlined in the review, is we had polarized opinions about the performance of Sendias, or the role of Sendias. And certainly it was apparent to me that that role had expanded quite significantly. I think arguably, and to everybody's credit, probably in part an attempt to cover the gap created by a dysfunctional Senar service. And I can understand why that would have been the case. There had been previous considerations of reviewing Sendias in Birmingham, but those reviews had, for various reasons, not concluded. And so my report recommended that the review should be conducted under independent cover and should be concluded. That's now happened. The review, I'm afraid, members, is a very, very critical judgment about Sendias being committed to its function, but on a number of different levels outside of its function, and therefore its core function not being compliant with minimum standards which are set by NCH on behalf of government and the Children's Disability Council. And so that's causing a full review of the operation of Sendias now, a reset of Sendias in Birmingham. And I know the director will talk to you more about that if you need to. And I'm sure you've got further conversations to say to me about that. My report made comments about the need for improved co-production, the phrase that's used about the way in which services, particularly for Send, a real plank of the 2014 legislation that's taking us into the way Send is judged at the moment. Co-production being about the involvement of particularly parents and children and partners and the various sectors that involve Send in making sure decisions are transparent and well communicated and contributed to by the wider group of the people who are affected by those decisions. And again, good work has got, co-production was not happening in Birmingham. Good work has happened since that the framework for co-production, which the board is going to try to help oversee in terms of its implementation. I would want to say, present company accepted, and it's not just because I'm sat here, but the Parent Carer Forum in Birmingham, like everywhere, it's a complicated, very idiosyncratic, they're all unique services. The formal route whereby parents can engage with the services of the local authority. My experience of the Parent Carer Forum in Birmingham has been exceptional. Sorry to embarrass Sabia on my right, and it's not just because I'm sat beside her that I'm saying it. Sabia's contribution to the board has been invaluable. There was a good cause for a complete lack of confidence and a lack of faith, but Sabia has led on behalf of the parents an approach which says, we think we've got to have faith, we want to invest in the current change programme, but we will be watching avidly and we expect not to be let down. And there's a sense of real burden in those terms. I think that's been really, really important for the future. I need to make a point which we haven't talked about so far, and then I'm going to go on to talking about what we're doing at the moment. But part of my brief as a commissioner was to consider whether or not Send services in Birmingham were safe to stay with the City Council. Do you need to have a trust? The summary of it, and I'm quite happy to go into that, is I don't think you need a trust, but I think it's quite balanced. And I've kind of put that as a contingency upon my recommendations being pursued by the City Council and its partners. I think going for a trust now would be disruptive and distracting because of all the work that's required to get the services better. And I've got faith in the work that's been done so far, but that work needs to be sustained. If it isn't sustained, then we have to review that position urgently because trusts can work, as you know, in Birmingham. My commitment is that you're in a position where you can make the necessary improvements and can avoid the unnecessary disruption of a trust being created for Send. But we all need to work together to make that happen. If we don't, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board. And DFE are watching that point very, very closely indeed, as I think some of you are aware. Going forward, that's the really hard set of messages. And what I'm pleased to note is that I've had a letter from the leader, the chief executive, and other lead members and key people in the system saying that they accept my recommendations in full. I understand the tone of that letter. They're saying they accept the recommendations. They don't necessarily accept all of the assessment, would be my judgment of that letter. And I think that's fair enough because it's hard medicine. I know it's hard medicine. But it's really, really important that we don't slip on the introduction of the recommendations and seeing them through and making them work. That includes a lot of work around what's called the APP, the Accelerated Priorities Plan. That's DFE language, which is the bedrock of the action planning for how do we get the services better. At the next meeting of the board, no, the next but one meeting of the board, there will be a further formal review with DFE of the progress of the APP, which is really detailed stuff like around what do you have to do to make Sennar work better? What are the milestones for improving co-production? A set of issues around there. One of the themes in the APP, which I think is useful to reflect on, there are 4 things. One of them is back to basics. It's getting the basics right, which is really, really important in terms of just core systems management. So we're driving at that through the board at the moment. We're also driving at trying to get the fixes in Sennar sorted. One of the problems in Sennar in Birmingham, as in many places, is it's bedeviled by some of the staffing issues that we know affect a number of public sector services. The resolution to that has been necessary and has been really well led by the director in that you've recruited far and wide because of the way in which Sennar can function on a remote basis as a service. The downside to that is, and we're already seeing this anecdotally from parents, is you're working with people who are running the assessment coordination who don't know the city. And you've got to get towards a position where the recruitment of the Sennar staff is much more localised because you need to know people who know where the schools are. And have got a sense of the geography of the place, and they've got a sense of the population of the place and the demography and the needs of the city. But that's got to come next, as well as the leadership of Sennar. It's on the way. Some really important permanent appointments have been made, including the arrival in November of an assistant director for SEND and inclusion. That's a really, really important role. It's a permanent appointment. It's taken too long to achieve that appointment, but at least it's now done. The person comes with extraordinarily strong credentials, but will need to be backed by everybody to get the job done. They'll need to be really, really well supported by a council that wants to commit to do the job well. I will say this out loud, members, because I know this will offend some people. I'll say it out loud. Don't make her go through another interview process in her first months in the role. She's appointed. She's really good. Take care of her because people like her are really hard to find. Commit to the appointment as a political edifice, as well as the edifices around her. There are bids in the system for additional special school places, and that's really good news. It's in the context of the government's current approach to the Green Paper and the recognition of the need for additional special school places. But there's another feature to SEND in Birmingham, which members need to be aware of. I'm conscious, Chair, I'm speaking for too long, but it's all important stuff, I think. You've got a profile in the city of the placement of children with special educational needs and disabilities, whereby that profile appears to show that not enough of those children proportionally by national averages are in mainstream school. That's an issue, a conversation we've been having in detail with the school leadership around the table. It's a really complicated and difficult issue because, of course, parents want to have what they think is best for their children, and very often when their child has an EHCP, a plan, they want that to reflect the need for a very specialist placement, a special school that's going to deal with my child's special needs. And in many respects, that's necessary. But the profile in Birmingham shows that we've got a percentage lower, significantly lower in some respects, of children in mainstream school. And many children in mainstream school can be well served and their educational outcomes can be better by staying in mainstream school. It's a complicated issue. You can't move children around once they're placed. That would be a disastrous issue. But what you've got to do is think about how your systems are serving a more balanced approach. And I think there's work in progress around that. I'm really pleased with the head teacher engagement. Penultimate point, Chairman, if I may, I'm now working more closely with health colleagues about the health dimension to services for SEND in Birmingham. I do think putting this as constructively as I can, remember it's an Ofsted and CQC inspection. I do think that the council's problems quite legitimately have overshadowed some of the NHS problems, but I want us to make sure we're getting attention on the NHS problems as well, because they do have some, and I think some of them might be resource-based, and so we're looking closely at that. And I'm very pleased with some of the work that I've been able to do with NHS colleagues And again, I've met some wonderful people doing superb work in a range of settings. It's been an absolute privilege to work alongside them. All of that, Chairman, to finish off, is under the auspices of the Improvement Board. I know there's an issue about the role of scrutiny with regard to an Improvement Board, and I'm happy to talk about that with you as we go forward. The Improvement Board is made up of a range of stakeholders, which includes, and usually in Birmingham, 5 seats for politicians. I've done 7 or 8 improvement boards. That's by far and away the most political space and improvement board that we've had. I'm happy to go with that, but I know there are issues about how close politicians feel to the work of the improvement board. And we've also had to go through some quite interesting formative work because the previous version of the improvement board was not functioning well, and there were issues about how well the agenda was being protected and looked after by the people around the table. I feel the improvement board is, pardon the technical expression, getting its mojo. I think it's starting to work well. I think the partnerships across the table are starting to work well, and it has to be a long-term process for the city. I would suggest long after you've happily waved goodbye to me, and it stays as a central edifice for your future work in improvement and services, because it's years of work ahead. But I know that you may want to talk about some issues to do with the engagement of the improvement board, and I'm happy to do that, Chair. Thank you for hearing me out. I know that was a lot, but I felt I needed to explain myself.
No, that's great. Thank you for that detailed delivery to us. I know that there'll be lots of questions, so I did want to make sure we had some time. So can members indicate if they do want to ask questions? That's lovely. I'll go straight to Councillor Morrell, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, John, for coming to during the committee today. Obviously, we've met before on the recruitment panel. The first one is just thank you to the board for the work that you're doing. It is valued. Obviously, we've had some differences. Obviously, my role is shadow cabinet, and you respect that role. But obviously, the work that you're doing is valued in Birmingham City Centre. So I just want to put that on public record. Obviously, the discrepancy that I have is around Sendar and Sendias. I've recently had a meeting with Sendias, and we've had more of an in-depth discussion about issues around the review submitted to the Send Improvement Board. And the consensus really is the fact that Sendar, which you've already just alluded to, actually, I'm happy that you said, have had major issues with communication. And a lot of that has been down to staff turnaround. They simply have not had, they've had so much staff turnaround, so many interims at the Sendar service that when parents are going through the Sendar service to try and get positions for their children and the ECHPs, that they end up getting stuck in limbo. And when you're in limbo, where are you going to go? You're going to go to the Sendias service. And so the Sendias service effectively has to be picking up pieces, frankly, and I'm going to say it bluntly, a crap Sendar service in Birmingham City Council. And I feel, given the way we've explored this, that I think that Sendias have been taking a lot of the brunt of the work that's been done on the Send Improvement Board with that review. And I think that's very unfair and unjustified. And when I first took on this role as shadow cabinet, we had the Send Green Paper that was going to Parliament, which is a national picture. And the consensus there again was that the reason that you are attacking Sendias is because you were trying to take power away from parents and more power to the local authority, so that effectively the local authority just gets to mark its own homework. So that we have this damning report on Birmingham City Council where you failed 12 out of the 13 recommendations. And if you just kind of restructure the Sendias service, but then how are parents supposed to take a service like Sendar to tribunal? So you are effectively marking your own homework. So we do have some questions about the review. And I have also discussed, obviously, with you, Chair, we would like to get Sendias in front of this committee so that they can have an explanation. The former head of Sendias did come to the Send Improvement Board and submitted their response to this independent review. It was passed around the table to all the board members, and as the member left, the chair, yourself and the Director of Children's Services asked for that review to be taken back. And I think it's really important, so that there is full transparency, that review is brought towards this scrutiny committee, so that the senior heads of Sendias get their opportunity to explain their side of the story. And like I say, I respect your position. You have the power to come in and do this stuff. But we also, in a local democracy, fundamentally, need to ensure that there's full transparency in what's going on. Because when I'm hearing as a shadow cabinet member that they feel like they are being mistreated and haven't had their side of the story listened to, and when I've actually witnessed that on the Send Improvement Board, they did not have sufficient time to properly rebuttal some of the claims that were made against them in that review process. And I do not think that's very constructive. So some of the questions I have about the review, if you want to write these down because there's quite a few of them. What discussions and actions have taken place regarding the market testing for the outsourcing of Sendias? And I'd like to know who agreed to those. Where can I find a public record of that decision, if it exists? How many service users were spoken to in order to get the evidence of the work that was undertaken, in particular with the review? So how many people did the people doing the review speak to? How many open cases were actually looked at? Because as I'm sure you're aware, there's many open cases that just get kicked into long grass and dragged. And again, one of the issues with Sendai and Sendias is communication. That's, again, to go back to the fundamental point, that's why so many people are going to Sendias in the first place, is because they go back to Sendai and there's a new person, they don't know what the issue was, and we just keep going round and round and round in circles. What parent groups have Sendias consulted? In particular, we've got here the Parent Carer Forum. And what young people has Sendias support? What young people actually in the Sendias review have you spoken to? Have you gone out and spoken to people, actual cases, to get their side of the story? And finally, of course, what was Sendias' response? I've already said there was a response, but they haven't actually had a chance to do it. So those are basically a broad theme of a range of questions that we have around the Sendias review. I'm very interested to hear your response to that.
Thanks,
So I would also, just to finalise,
Okay.
just to really cement the point, for a third time on this committee, Sendias have absolutely got to come to this committee to answer the questions about what's going on. And one final point, we had the DCS at the last committee that made a claim to this board that the head of Sendias agreed to the review. I can confirm that was not true. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Morrell. I have let you go on quite a bit there.
Quite a lot to go through.
I think before you come in, John, I think we do need to make anybody aware that is watching this meeting that this committee are at a disadvantage in terms of we have not had sight of the review. Councillor Morrell has a seat on the improvement board and is party to much more information than this committee is, and is also under restriction on what information he can discuss or pass on. And I must say that none of the information from the improvement board has been passed on to this committee from Councillor Morrell. So I just wanted to make that very clear, because clearly there have been worries aired on this committee in terms of the improvement board is not under our direct scrutiny function. And we're very interested in terms of what can be done to increase the transparency of the improvement board in relation to how it works and who's involved. And something as perhaps as simple as having an independent chair of that board may increase people's reassurance in terms of transparency and objectivity. I will let you come back and answer some of the questions that Councillor Morrell has put. You may not feel able to answer all of them. And I will just say, Councillor Morrell, that we will be talking about bringing Sendias to the next meeting of this committee when we get to the work programme. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Can I deal, if I may, I'll come to Councillor Morrell's very important points in just a moment, but if I can just deal, if I may, with this issue about the engagement of the improvement board and the access to it. Now, I'll have to give a little bit more context before doing that. I would say to you that I observed the last meeting of the previous version of the improvement board last September before I was fully appointed. I was pretty appalled. I thought it was a dreadful meeting, if I'm honest with you. And what's more, what was very clear was that the content of the meeting was being flashed around social media with various comments and opinions almost immediately. The officers who were trying to do the work felt that. I made a plea right at the beginning, and I have to say, your predecessor in the role on behalf of the Conservative Group, I think was very, very constructive and supportive in that arrangement. I said to members and I said to all parties, we've got to do this business. It's really difficult. It's really sensitive. We do it around the table. We work in proper business-like terms. There's a political engagement, but I want the politics not to be drawn in. And let's keep politics out of children's services. My experience over 40 years is when you get party politics into children's services, children suffer in any kind of direction. And I'll stand by that. I actually have been hugely impressed with the political discipline since that early time, and I'm really grateful to it for all members of all parties, and I think that's been really helpful. I do think I've needed to be quite disciplined in my role as chair, and I do think actually on many levels I am an independent chair, although I'm acting on behalf of the Department for Education, so you might query that independence. But I've got to return to a headline point here, colleagues, which is a difficult one to say, but put it bluntly, you're in intervention. And you're in intervention because the services across the piece were failing catastrophically, children in Birmingham for several years, and the prospects of them improving is not good or wasn't good at that stage. So we needed to get ourselves together, and I think we've done that, and I think we're maturing in terms of political engagement. And since we spoke, Chair, very helpfully, I think I've done some further sounding out about this. As far as I'm concerned, 5 political places at that board, which is what I would call crudely a doing meeting. It's there to get things done. And no disrespect to politicians, but that's not your role in terms of running services directly. 5 places is probably a bit too many, but I'll stick with it, but I won't have more. And you have to live with my kind of pronouncement in those terms. How those places are used according to the governance of the council and the preference of the ruling group is up to you. And I'm quite happy to look at alternative models around who should be in different seats. What has been said to me quite properly with regard to scrutiny is because the role of the board is so direct in terms of activity, there's a question mark around how scrutiny involves itself in the role of an intervention. And we've had some conversations about that as well. I'm open for those conversations going forward. But there's also a question as to whether or not, for example, scrutineers can be close to decision-making and operations, because then you're scrutinising yourselves, and that's a challenge to be thought through as well. But I'm open to consideration. I'd also like to look at ways in which we can maybe open up now a bit more openly and transparently, because I want transparency. For example, the minutes or the action notes of the meetings. Or do some approach to debriefing about the meetings. And I'm very happy to do some of that. But so Chair, I hope that's a useful kind of pick on the point around the role of the improvement board. But you're not going to get the chair change with DFE agreement. I might have days when I would rather you could, but I don't think it's going to happen. You're in intervention, members. I just have to say that to you very, very clearly and repeatedly. You're in intervention because your services were failing catastrophically. And I can't say that often enough. And I think that's an issue for me sometimes as well. With regard to Sendias, right, let me just go back again. The scrutiny can do what it wants, as far as I'm concerned in these terms. Have Sendias here if you want to. Revisit some of those conversations if you want to. I will give you, though, a kind of a managerial response in generic terms, Councillor Morale, to what you said. If you know you've got something fundamental to a service which is broken, that's Senar, and it's broken, do you fix it by letting business creep from another part of the service try and catch the pieces from it, or do you fix it? Well, obviously you fix it, and you've got to fix Senar. We haven't reviewed Senar because we don't need to. We know it's wrecked. We know it needs to be improved, and you don't improve it by a botched approach to letting another service pick up too many pieces. And incidentally, I'll say this out loud because nobody else wants to say it out loud, contribute to a very, very high level of referrals to tribunals that you've got in Birmingham, which is another failing in your system. I'm not saying that's the responsibility of Sendias, but there's a dimension to it. And you've got to think that through carefully as well. You need Sendias, like you need Senar, to be compliant with its role according to legislation, and it's not. And the independent review, not my review, and it's not my attack, which is the word you use, Councillor, and I'll just say I don't accept that word. The review was independently conducted by the business leaders on behalf of the sector. I don't know how many people they spoke to. You may ask them to come down. They may agree to, I don't know. But I would suggest, members, you're chasing the wrong issue, because I'd refer you back to what I said about my conversations elsewhere and what I know about the legislation and what I know about the services. I do not know why Sendias has the profile it's got in Birmingham, but its profile is disproportionate to its relevance to the delivery of a high quality SEND service, which is the dependence of everybody. Of course, it's an important component, but I'll refer you again to what I know other directors have said. They don't know what Sendias is. It functions well in their services, but it sits at a particular level. Now, that level in Birmingham, I think, has become, for various reasons, disproportionate. If you carry on chasing that, you won't be putting your energies into what you need to be chasing, which is the improvement of Senar and everything that comes around it. That's the real key that you should be focusing upon. I could say more, but I don't think it'll be healthy to say more. I've given you that. If you want to try and do a review of Sendias, do so. If we can find ways in which we can share the headline contents of the review, I'll look at doing that. But it was commissioned on a particular basis. I will deal with one of the key point, which is, I think, implied by the question. I just want to be clear about this, and I completely understand why it's been implied, but I do think we've been very clear about this at the board, Councillor Moran. The commitment that's been made is to renewing Sendias, making it compliant with basic services, and that's going to be a tough piece of work for the people who are in the service, and already steps have been taken to look at the ways in which you can do work in partnership with the Birmingham Children's Trust about a version of early help for SEND, which is going to be really positive, and which is where that resource, which has become disproportionate in Sendias, will be better based. And I think that's a good plan. There has been no commitment made to outsourcing Sendias. There is no decision taken in those terms. A decision has been taken for a process now, which frankly I think has been a bit elaborate as well, and I said so at the last board, to see how Sendias should be reformed in Birmingham to meet its statutory compliance. That's the decision that's been taken. A part of that process will consider as to whether or not there could be a benefit for the service for it to be outsourced, but that's not a decision that's taken. And that's a legitimate consideration because of the independent word that's in the title of Sendias. Many authorities feel that Sendias service works better at arm's length than the local authority. And I think there's a case for that. I also, frankly, my preference is to keep services in when you can as a local authority. That's my naked admission to you. I think there's a case for keeping it in, but that's a decision that will be led by the director and her managers and brought through the due governance processes of the local authority. Other than that, I actually think we're probably about to rehearse the problem that I'm concerned about by putting too much time into an area of the service where our focus should be elsewhere.
Thanks, John. Just on that point, it is a political and a pledge, but a manifesto pledge of ours that, preferential is to keep all services in-house rather than outsourcing any of our services. One very quick comeback, because there are others waiting.
I agree. Sendar, as I said in my statement, Sendar is the issue. And I feel that we have spent far too much time on Sendias when all Sendias are doing is trying to pick up the pieces. And the worry that I have, the core point is the fact is that's the one area that parents have to take that service like that to tribunal. And you're right, they should be at arm's length. Whether also or not is open debate, but that's the whole point. And so the fact that we have to review about that service and we're talking about restructuring it, it's like alarm bells are ringing. It's like Senar is really the focus that we should be looking at. So I actually agree with your premise.
The role of Sendias is not to refer to tribunal, but it's really interesting that you think it is.
Well, no, that's you just said that there are far too many tribunals as a result.
Because I was responding to your point, Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
I mean, if we're talking about levels of tribunals, Birmingham isn't anything special in reality. There was I read a piece about East Sussex County Council that have a massively high level of appeals against DHCP plans, and they actually lose pretty much every single one of those appeals. So I think there is a real problem in as we already know, and you've mentioned, a real problem in Senar. And actually, the amount of appeals that are because there are some really bad decisions made
But it's
at the
possible-
beginning of the process, and the processes don't work well.
Exactly, because the appeals, the tribunal process is, it's almost once you're there, you're likely for the tribunal to find in favour of the parents. And I can understand why that would be. You need systems which are going to legitimately and constructively give parents confidence not to go to tribunal.
Yeah, and I think we'd all agree with that, John. Councillor Clancy.
I've been pipped at the post with my question, but so I don't want to really overrun because we've discussed a lot, but it was around the review and about transparency really and the governance from the scrutiny perspective. Because I was going to say, John, we're slightly at a disadvantage sometimes. I mean, I've sat on education back in 2015 and then politically we get taken off, we get put on another committee, we come back, we take our eye off the ball, we look at things, we dip in, we dip out. And so it's not an expert field for me. I mean, you'd quite clearly win mastermind if you were on that chair now. And, you know, I don't doubt that at all. So from just looking from a governance, from the hierarchy and where we are in the pecking order and where we sit, and I'm not dumbing down anybody's intelligence in this room, it's probably far beyond mine. But as somebody who's seen it and been there and done a call-in on home to school transport, and I've been there in the ripples and the troughs and the peaks. And it is difficult at this level to really get to know what an improvement board would be saying or doing. And do I really want to know all the detail? Because quite frankly, I'm not paid to do it. But from the perspective of we do have constituents, we do have residents, it's filtered through, it affects what we talk about, and it goes across the board, as we know. So from a governance and transparency, and you touched on it actually earlier, Chair, about having that site, that visual on it. In your opinion, in your expert opinion, at this level with the members we have in the room, what should we be scrutinising for the years? I mean, obviously the chair, the cabinet member, there's the portfolio that we look at, and there's so much in the mix, there's so many ingredients in it to make it valuable from our perspective. Really, where the improvement board sits, where you sit, DFE, improvement board, SNR. What should we really be focused on? Because often, my experience, we get reports come through, they look glossy. It's not what's in the sentence, it's what's in between. And it's often very difficult. But from a scrutiny perspective, and I've argued the toss on homeschool transport, I sat with officers I didn't really know and had a massive headache for 6 hours after, telling them the policy was wrong, and it went ahead anyway. And we know the history now. But, and I stand by that with a colleague at the time. It is difficult for us to know really what to scrutinise and what is really being done for the positive aspects of the city. So we know you've been quite honest today with what is wrong, but we need access to that at a particular level to be able to scrutinise it.
I think that's a vitally important question for this. I think it's a really difficult question. I'm going to come to it, but it's just occurred to me. I just need to say very, very briefly one point, not for engagement, but just to say it, because I didn't say it at the time. Councillor Morale, you've made reference to the board and my chairing of it at the time of the Sendiash review. Just to be clear for the record, I do not accept what you said about my handling of that meeting. So just to be very, very clear. Talk about it outside of the room. Very happy to do it.
Was you in the DCS?
No.
I've just said to you, I don't accept what you just said. And so I think you've said it, and I said I don't accept it. So let's leave it at that for the time being.
So are you going to, yeah.
So I think it's a really important
That's
question. So I understand the frustrations that you may feel, particularly when you've got a failing service. And there's a couple of points I'd make back to you, Councillor Clancy, if I may. In the context of what I've said about my concerns about the political officer culture in Birmingham, which I do think is a complicated, and everywhere it's an issue and everywhere it needs to be set and considered. But one dimension I think that's come out of that, my understanding of it, is I think members at different moments in the SEND story in Birmingham were catastrophically let down by the way in which they were briefed by some key officers. And I don't blame that, because I think it's been an extraordinarily difficult service to lead in extraordinarily difficult circumstances. But I can well understand why certain individual members would be very, very angry about the position they were left in by poor briefings or actually inaccurate briefings And I know why those briefings were made. I think there's an issue there which needs to be thought through in the right circumstances going forward. So I get that and I can understand it. And that includes being told things were fine when they categorically weren't. And I understand that. And that's why I'm going to err on the side of saying what the problems are from my role, partly because it's easy to say that, but it's also important that you've got a really strong sense of how far we've got to go. The second point to say in answer to the question is to repeat the point I made earlier, but I've had exchanges with officer colleagues involved in scrutiny about the dilemma that we've got here, and it is a dilemma, that what government won't do is say to an authority, your governance systems have failed in the delivery of these services. So in our improvement of the services, we're going to let your governance systems oversee the delivery directly. And that's the kind of the tension that I have to work in the space of. My view is that the improvement journey includes much increased transparency and engagement in the due governance process, but we're not there yet. I'm very happy to do this as often as you want me to, as part of my role with Birmingham while I'm still with Birmingham. I find this constructive and helpful. I can't tell you all the detail around this table. I don't think we're at the point where the Improvement Board will be an open session for a good long while. And in many ways anyway, the Improvement Board is a management board. You don't have the public in management boards. You don't have members in management boards all the time. I do want to look with you at ways in which we can improve the communication, and Sabir will say to you, communication is one of the bedeviling issues in SEND in Birmingham anyway, but the communication between the board and yourselves through the lead member and through the DCS as we go forward. I think and hope when we get past the review of the APP that happens in December, which I mentioned to you earlier, we may be in a stronger position to look at ways in which we can improve that transparency and look at ways in which we can improve the due role of scrutiny to oversee improvement in its services. But I'm saying to you, I don't think we're there yet, and it's my job to say so, or otherwise I'm saying so.
Thank you, John. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be as quick as I can. There's two things that concern me. One is the rate of appeals that we've alluded to earlier is rising. It's rising at quite a steady rate. That's one of the key indicators in the APP. I think the rate of appeals has probably gone up by about 50% over the last few years. It's a significant increase and an ongoing increase. One of the biggest concerns for me about that is that because the rate of appeals is so high, if somebody submits an appeal now, it probably won't be heard until September. Now, we've talked about the rate of appeals. The parent has 8 weeks to decide whether to appeal or not. So the local authority makes a decision that the parent disagrees with, and in over 90% of cases, the tribunal agrees that the decision is wrong. So this isn't parents just like taking a chance. They're trying to get what they're actually legally entitled to. So they have 8 weeks to decide whether or not to do that, to object to a decision that the local authority has already got wrong. So the idea that a parent to say, well, okay, you've made the wrong decision, but I'll leave it with you and see what happens, when the potential is that they lose that right of appeal. So again, I'll come back to the decision making. That has to improve because appeals do take so long to get to a hearing now. If an appeal is lodged today, the local authority has 8 months to sort this out, to stop it going to an appeal. So I don't understand why the number of appeals is seen as an issue and not the decision making. Broadly speaking, a few years ago, I think Sennar had something like fewer than 40 staff. I'm told it's about 180 now. So there is a massive increase in the number of, and yet, for instance, the number of EHCP, the number of assessment requests, the number of EHCPs issued on time is falling. It's not going. And just a concern one of my colleagues brought to me last week, there is now a tendency in EHCPs to name mainstream by type as the school. Now, I find that incredibly worrying because that in itself is absolutely bound to drive the level of appeals. I cannot understand why, in the particular case that was brought to my attention, even the current school wasn't named. The EHCP named mainstream by choice. Just for slight explanation, it wouldn't be unusual, for instance, in the past for special school to be named by type, because the local authority recognises that the child needs a special school, but there simply isn't a place. We're all aware that the bid for 3 special schools that the local authority is discussing is pretty much an indication, I think, that we're 1,000 places short in special schools, I would have thought. So the number of appeals isn't coming down, and it seems to me that CENAR is taking part in behaviour that is designed to actually increase the number of appeals. And the only assumption I can come to is that they're doing it to try and increase the number of assessments that are done on time.
I think you're getting into some of the technicality, which is important, but I'm not sure that I'm equipped to deal with it. I'm not sure if your latest data on rates of appeals is absolutely accurate, but I need to go back to that. I think you're right in trends over the last year or so, but I think it might be turning a little bit now. The increase in staffing in CENAR is because one of the features of CENAR being broken was it was appallingly understaffed. And the quality of the EHCPs was very poor as well as out of time. You've got to improve that staffing. You've got to improve the management of it. I don't think that there's any kind of deliberate approach to that work that's causing the increase in appeals. I think, or would have caused the increase in appeals. I think, I say again, and this is, I think, a 2014 legislative issue. Once you're on the track to the tribunal, the chances are the local authority will lose. That's the East Sussex experience, is national experience. It's the way the system is kind of geared, which is really unhelpful. And that's no disrespect to the parents who want the best for their children. What you've obviously got to do, as I think you referred to, Councillor Hughes, is try and get the decisions at the front end better so that people have got more confidence and get it right. One of the challenges you've got though within Birmingham is the sufficiency of places is desperately poor. So creating those new school places will take some time, needs to be matched, I would argue, with an increase in resource provision within the mainstream, and needs to be matched by an approach to inclusivity within the mainstream, alongside the increase of special schools. So you can address that profile of placements, which is wrong in Birmingham at the moment. But all of that is really, really long, hard work. And you've got to go back to building blocks. So one further point I'll make here, and I've used this allusion or metaphor at other times. Sending Birmingham is like a very important broken building. It's completely fallen into disrepair. And you've got to fix all of it. The structure's wrong. The flooring's gone, the wiring's gone, the plumbing needs fixing, the windows are gone, the roof is poor. You've got to do it all, but some of your fixes have got to be makeshift because you've got people still living in the building while you're trying to fix it, and you can't stop them living in the building to fix it. And if any part of that method, so maybe CENAR's the windows, I don't know how you extend it. You've got to find ways in which you can do short-term fixes to get ready for the longer-term fixes, and you've got to go back to the basics. CENAR in Birmingham has been broken for a long time and needs to be fixed. And you don't fix it by fixing the stuff around it, you fix it by addressing it. And that requires a lot of work, not just at getting staff who are unqualified staff, but getting staff who are competent to understand the nature of their role in leading EHCPs, and getting them trained to a level where they can do that well, and getting them to be closer to Birmingham to do it well in a way they understand the city and they understand the children who are at the heart of their work. So I can understand how we've got to where we've got to. Getting out of it is systematic, complicated, long-term work.
Yeah, and you're right, John, you know, when you say that the decisions at the beginning of the process need to be better, but then the actual process itself needs to be better to deal with the fallout from those poor decisions being made at the beginning, because, you know, that eight-month period where it could be fixed quite easily isn't being utilised. I'll let you come back quickly, Des. I've got a couple of questions and then we're going to have to move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you, Chair. Just the reason I mentioned about the what is a massive increase in staffing in CENAR is, as all the councillors will be aware, we're about to go into discussions and negotiations about the budget and the sustainability of what's happening now, it scares me. I don't see that the current staffing levels and spend on Senate is sustainable unless, Commissioner, you know.
Well, I don't know differently. I understand why you're scared, because I'd be very worried in your seat as well as I would be in the director's seat. I think the director is about to bring a report to cabinet. I'd give you a global statement about children's services, which I know from many interventions and many years of doing this work. It's cheaper to run successful services than it is to run failing services. If services are failing, you're not going to get out of it for free.
Karen, did you want to contribute to this discussion?
The greatest gift I've had in doing this job was that John's report came out in the same month that I was appointed. So rather than having to find out for myself what the issues were, they were all set out there. It is the second was the independent review children's social care nationally, which we're still waiting for response on. But I think members probably could do with a better understanding of how the improvement board fits in to the overall ecology, and we'll take that away and work on it. I'm reminded of something I used to say about local government finance, is that it's not a spreadsheet, it's a web. And I think what we're hearing today is the real webbiness of children's services. If we change one thing, everything else needs to move with it, so that you don't get a run or a hole in the system. And, you know, something as simple as a number, in this case of appeals, can mean several things. We know what we think it means, that the decision making isn't right. It can also mean that the advice is directly that. I'd like to see more emphasis on the I and the A, instead of the S, information and advice function. So I fully understand that we've got to where we are. So I'm looking forward to working with the improved board. I find it tremendously useful, and the level of expertise recommended and we will see that. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. John, just a couple of really quick questions from me on your report recommendations. So just because these haven't been touched on anywhere. So you talk about the need to regularise the roles of relevant staff and managers, moving from interim to permanent appointments wherever possible. And you mentioned the important appointment that has been made, which has been sort of outstanding for some time. So that's really good news. But are you concerned that there is still a high level of consultants still being utilised across the service? And in terms of, you know, Des raised it with our budgets, and intervention is expensive, but is that a worry in terms of the cost to the service in those financial terms? Is that taking away our ability to make those improvements more sustainable? And then just secondly, sorry, I'll do them together because we'll move on then. The recommendation with regards to incentivising the retention of key staff whose roles are business critical in that recommendation. I was wondering who made the decisions in terms of which staff are critical, and the suggested incentivisation, is that in monetary terms? And if so, what threat does that then place on the council in terms of equal pay or and/or national collective bargaining?
I'll deal with the second one first, if I may. I was a bit nervous about putting that one in there, but I think it's, I mean, the recommendations have all been accepted. I think that's one for the city to think about. I think it's perfectly legitimate to pay and reward systems, which can include recognition of both performance, but also to an extent loyalty. And I put it in there because my sense has been, because of that huge turbulence you've had, it's been massive. That figure is frightening. 9 chiefs and 9 directors in 8 years. It's just not. It's not conceivable. You've got to think. The organisation's got to think about how to stop that. And the progress is being made now. And I people come to work for money. They come to work for job satisfaction and to do a good. Especially in this kind of work, it's not entirely financially driven, but especially in this day and age, there's a financial dimension to it. I think it's for the council to work that one out, but it can be worked out. I wouldn't prescribe it, but I'm really pleased that I think the recommendation has made people start thinking in those terms. And I know there's a huge issue about equal pay legally, but also in general terms. Senior managers get paid well, I think, but arguably not as well as they could be paid given some of the circumstances discussed. You need to get the best people in Birmingham, and you've got some of the toughest services. I'm a Brummie. I love this place, and I'm not talking you down, but you've got to compete in a phenomenally difficult senior market nationally. And you've got to think about how you're going to do that. And one of the ways you do it is around what's the rewards mechanisms that you're using. The other way you've got to do it is think more deeply about what the place is like to work in when you're a senior manager. It's a senior management job in any local authority is really, really difficult. I'm not apologising for it. I'm not trying to win over the hearts of members. I know the environment I'm talking to at the moment, but they're really, really difficult, exposing jobs to do. They're very, very difficult. They're more difficult here at the moment, and I'm not sure that's entirely because of some of the challenges services. I think it's some of the context. Taking you back into the interim bit, I do think you can probably save a lot of money when you start reducing the dependency on senior interim staff. Not probably sure it's as much as you think it might be, but I think it will work. I actually want you to get out of the interim dependency for other reasons, because you need more people who've got more long-term commitment to the solutions. No disrespect to any interim, but I know that this solution for SEND in Birmingham, it's 2 to 3 years away before you start seeing tangible improvements, which is driving Sabia berserk. But I'm honest with her about it, at least, and she wants to see solutions which parents feel, and she's absolutely right. But I'm being honest to say what parents will see changing markedly. Homeschool transport accepted, brilliant this year. It's going to take a lot of time. Well, you need managers who want to be there when that happens. You need managers who are going to stick it through. I made a virtue in my career thinking, well, I'm going to see this out. I thought personally 4 years was a minimum to be around for when your decisions come through. That's why you want to move away from the interims. But the final thing I'd say to you about the interims, as we currently stand, and I understand what your concerns are, but you'd have been lost without some of the interims that you've had in Birmingham SEND over the last couple of years. They have been brilliant people whose commitment to the city astonishes me. It really does. They've been brilliant, brilliant interims who've rescued you. But they have this sense of being mercenary people that you can't trust, and they're over there. They've been fantastic, in my opinion, as a non-interim myself. And you've got to be careful about painting them as people that you want to get rid of, because they've been hugely valuable to you. You've been in much, much worse circumstances without some of the people I've been working with.
Thanks, John. Thanks for that. And thanks, we're very grateful for you coming here today and giving us your time. We're also, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, Sue. We have got Sue Harrison, who's joined us virtually today, DCS. Sorry, Sue.
No, thank you, Chair. And I'm really sorry that I'm not able to be here in person, but virtually is better than not being able to attend. And I just wanted to say, I know we're short of time, but building on John's point, just wanted to kind of assure the committee, actually, we've got a brilliant substantive director of SEND starting on the 2nd of November, Helen Ellis. She's joining us, very well experienced from Dudley. We've also got a really experienced lead of homeschool transport, Adrian, who's going to come from Wiltshire. His travel service has won awards, actually national awards. So Birmingham can attract the best people. We are attracting the best people. Once they get their feet under the table, they will be able to then go and appoint a substantive team. So I absolutely support what John said about we've had some brilliant interim expertise, but obviously we're about building relationships, aren't we? We want longer term commitment, and that's what we're making some good progress. And finally, it would be helpful, I think, to cite the committee at some point on my directorate improvement plan. The APP, the Accelerated Progress Programme for SEND, is one of 5 chapters of that improvement plan. And picking up Councillor McCarthy's point, this is a web of improvement, and SEND won't improve on its own. It's part of a whole directorate targeted improvement programme, which I'm really happy to bring to this committee so that you're better able to join up the dots. So that's an open offer from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue, and we would definitely take you up on that offer, because joining up the dots is not always easy. And, you know, we're very grateful for any help and information that you can provide to help us do that, because all of us on this committee, you know, we're here for the same reason, and we want to work with you to ensure that our children get the best possible services that Birmingham can deliver to them. Just going back to yourself, John, you know, I'm very grateful for your commitment to look at and think about and see how you can work with us in terms of our governance systems to increase the transparency around the improvement board. I'm happy to, you know, to have further discussions. We would very much like to have you back to scrutiny, maybe early next year, to give us an update of the work that you're doing. Hopefully by then we'll all be a bit more aware of what's going on. Certainly, if we, you know, if you could start sharing the action notes or minutes in a way that you feel would be would fit in and would meet some of the concerns that you have, I think that would be a really good first step for us to feel like we have got sort of sight of something, and I think that would be really useful. So yeah, thank you very much, John. We look forward to welcoming you back, and of course you can. Yes, I was just about to say you're more than welcome to stay with us. I'm going to move swiftly on to homeschool transport and welcome John Elsgood, who is the interim lead children and young people's travel service. And as you know, we also have Sue Harrison online virtually, and we also have, excuse me, grabbing my notes, Victor Roman, who's also joined us virtually. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much. Good morning, councillors, and lovely to see you again. I joined you pre-September, and I did promise to come back following the first few weeks of school to give you an update on how the homeschool transport service had delivered. So I'm delighted to be here, and particularly with some of the beautiful artwork. It's great to see. So if I move on to my first slide, I'm going to just run through a few headlines, give you a bit of updates on what we've seen over the last couple of months, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in the future, and then I'll happily take some questions from yourselves as appropriate. So I think it's fair to say, and thank you for the kind words, John, actually, that significant progress has been made this year to mitigate the issues that we had experienced in kind of academic years 20 and 21. We obviously took a lot of time preparing for this, and we built an operations centre in Woodcock Street during the first week of term to really make sure that we could deliver the homeschool transport service in the best way, in the most agile way, as we were sort of hitting that most riskiest period of time. And we had an open offer actually to elected members to come and visit us, and I was delighted to welcome Chair and Councillor Hughes and Councillor McCarthy, who came and visited us and had a little look around the operations centre that we ran. I was fortunate enough to spend some time working on the Olympics and kind of mirrored a little bit of what we've done there, so it was a really slick operation. And actually the preparation that we saw and that work that we did kind of delivered itself in terms of the KPIs that you can see at the bottom. So on the first full day back at school, which was Wednesday the 7th, we saw that 99.5% of our routes ran successfully. So we transport over 4,500 children every day across more than 1,000 routes. On the first day, we saw 99.5 of those routes running successfully. The second day, we saw 99.7. And then after that, we saw a 99.9% service performance. So we're really, really pleased to see that. Invite you on to the next one. Thank you. So continuing on those headlines, and we can go into detail afterwards if you want. We actually got some really great feedback from a whole host of our stakeholders. It was lovely to get some great words from Sabir and colleagues from the PCF. Actually, some of the special heads spoke to us afterwards during and then at their special heads forum, where they were, really kind to us and the feedback that we received and feedback that they received from parents. I think we have recognised that communication is key. That's communications with families, it's communications with schools and our transport providers. And I think it's fair to say that that's significantly improved. We've used networking with the PCF, we've used the channels that we have available to us. We even managed to navigate 2 postal strikes, which threw in a couple of hiccups, but we were able to do that. So I'm glad to say that the communication there across those 4,500 children was far greater than it had been. And we also saw that the press and social media activity was notably down in previous years. And hopefully you saw that yourselves through constituents and residents relationships that you have. We definitely received fewer inquiries and complaints. And some of those complaints that we did receive, and of course, over 4,500 children, there's always going to be a couple of bumps in the road. Where those complaints came in, we dealt with them swiftly, promptly, empathetically, and to a satisfactory resolution. So that's all very well and good where we were in September, but we're not going to rest on our laurels. For me, it's about continuous improvement, and we are already on an improvement journey. That improvement journey launched in March 2021, and we have real management grip now to make sure that that improvement sees some tangible benefits. So there is a governance process in place, a monthly board that drives that change. And as you would expect in any project or improvement journey, there are work streams that delve down into a number of themes. So we're looking at our contracts and our commercial management, we're looking at our financial efficiencies, our policy, our organisational design, and our communications. So we have strengthened the management team, and we're doing additional work now to transition into that more permanent organisation design and to drive the culture within the team, as we have been doing already over the past few months. But we're really trying to strengthen that and build permanency with it. And we are continuing to build better ways of communicating. So yes, we have seen some improvement, but as I say, you can always get better. So we're creating better focus groups and certainly better feedback loops so that we can co-create with our children, our parents, our carers and our suppliers, and make sure that we are more agile and nimble and able to deal with those queries and concerns as they come in, head them off at the pass, and therefore they don't become complaints or issues. So, as Sue mentioned earlier, we've made an appointment to a new assistant director, and he will be joining us hopefully in the new year. Well, in the new year, sorry. He'll be joining us for 2 years, again bringing some permanency into that role. He has a wealth of experience in the home to school transport. I've met with him already. He's a really great guy, and I'm sure he'll be looking forward to meeting you and talking through his plans. In terms of continuous improvement as well, and I know this is something that members have been quite rightly wanting to talk about in the past, we are strengthening our DBS assurance. Again, we've ensured that we start to bring that a bit closer in-house. We're going through some improvement processes there, and we'll be undertaking those DBS checks internally by Birmingham City Council. We're just going through some training programs to make sure that we do that in the right way. And as I mentioned at the start, we will have hiccups. There will be bumps in the road. It's 4,500 children. But we make sure that where that happens, we deal with them empathetically, efficiently, and we work really closely with parents, with colleagues in the PCF and other colleagues to make sure that we you know, we really deal with those and we don't get into a situation where the parent or child is adversely affected. And that's completely in alignment with our child-centric approach. At my senior managers meeting that I host every week, the first agenda item that we have is always something called a child's moment. And we want to talk the talk around being a child-centric service, but we actually walk the walk as well. So I think if I just move on to the next slide, which is hopefully the last slide. Oops. It's all very well and good for me to say that things have gone well, but actually I wanted to share some of that feedback. You know, this isn't just John Elsgood with a vested interest. You know, we've had Birmingham Special Schools, we've had transport providers, we've had parents actually commenting and passing on their feedback. And actually a couple of those were following complaints. And some of those parents, and I'm not going to name them in an open forum, but some of those parents we've agreed to work with in the future. You know, they're great advocates for us. They're the people that are really feeling it. And some of those have offered to work with us to help us redesign and help us evolve. And that's something that we're really, really grateful for them for. And we're taking them up on that offer. So I'll pause there and take some questions. But, thank you for your time.
Thanks, John. You know, we have seen a vast improvement this year. We did have a very low bar, so you know. And you know, it was just great not to have those phone calls on the first 2 days of term telling me that we'd got children being taken to the wrong school and left there. So well done to you and the team. Before I take members who can put their hands up and indicate, I'm going to ask Sabia to come in as chair of Parent Care Forum, just to give us a taste of what she has experienced from parents on the ground, you know, who have that lived experience, and then I'll take questions from everybody else. Sabia.
Very much aligned with what John has said. I think a fascinating aspect of this has been there's around a cohort of parent in Birmingham who is very much, well, these are just disgruntled parents and they're just going to be perpetually annoyed with everything. And actually a lot of the positive comments that came were from parents that have had a pretty rough deal. So I think, you know, there needs to be a degree of understanding that as parents we are at the end of a sustained and systemic failure of services. But that doesn't mean that when there is improvement that we're not shouting that from the rooftops as well. And actually I did say to John that, you know, do share these comments. Parents are happy for those comments to be shared. And I think this is a real feather in the cap, because actually most of us around this table know how bad that service had got. And, you know, we've met in a similar room, and it really was as bad as it could be. So I think to have turned it around in the space of time that it's been turned around is really something amazing. And there have been blips along the road, like I say, with the postal strike and such things. And just on a final note to say that John's and his team's communication with the PCF is absolutely excellent. You know, even if it's just a quick call while he's on his way to lunch, bless him, but he keeps me in the loop, keeps the team in the loop. And we've worked together really well. And I have said to him and also to Commissioner that actually we could utilise some of the work they've done to showcase how we could do things in other areas in the centre space in the city. So thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Sabia. Councillor Birmingham was first to raise.
I mean, there isn't much to say. It's so good to read a report that's so positive anyway. So it was really just two very small points. The capacity, you say, is over 4,000. Are we able to, through the year, take on more? Have you got the room to take on more?
I think the model that we use and the transport providers that we use would enable us to do that as the cohort grows. There's always a quick program that will cost more, and it's certainly something that we will, you know, we will be able to deliver if you see the need to transport more children. We're absolutely seeing that trend of more children needing transport. We have the ability and the capacity to do that.
Perhaps within one small point, the feedback is really good, and especially when you see the complaints and how they're dealt with. With the, about the guide, was that a guide taken off or a guide changed? Because I know certainly with autistic, you need the consistency.
So it was around the guide being changed. Now, absolutely, we aim to keep that consistency with driver and guide with the children wherever we can. And that's always our ultimate aim. Sometimes guides will retire, guides will move house, guides don't want to work here anymore. There may be a whole host of reasons. And it could actually be that sometimes we have to move a guide because of just the routing that we're doing. And we absolutely try not to do that where we can, but sometimes it will happen. So of course, there's then a knock-on effect to the relationship that the child has with the new guide. As I say, we try and keep that consistency where we can, but it's not always possible because of those reasons I've just mentioned.
If you know it's happening, then you can have the two guides on and introduce them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Always aim to do a meet and greet with the guide and the child beforehand to make sure that they start to build that relationship. I think, as I say, it's important that we try and keep that consistency where we can, but sometimes it's not always possible. But where that's the case, we can have a conversation with the parent and the child and the carer, and we can explain the reasons behind that. And that's what we've tried to do. So, you know, we will always try and keep that consistency, but it's not always possible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Jan?
Thank you, Chair. My question is, and hello, just want to say, I'm really impressed with everyone with how everyone's working so well. My question is, if a young person has, I'm going to drive, for example, going to school, and the driver refuses to take the individual for whatever reason, or the child being a bit aggressive, or is likely to win problem. How long does it take to get this resolved?
So individual cases will be different. Obviously, when we hear that there's been that kind of issue, we would work really quickly to resolve that as soon as we can. And if we could turn it around in 24 hours, there may be extenuating circumstances that don't allow us to do that. And if there's a longer term pattern and the child's behaviour means that they can't be on that particular journey anymore, then we'll look at alternative solutions where we can. But again, it can take 24 hours, it can take a slightly longer to stand up a new arrangement. We will obviously work closely with our transport providers to make sure that they're able to deal with those sorts of situations, but each case can be individual, and it depends on the risk assessment of that child, depends on the alternative routes that we can provide, or it depends on, you know, whether we can have to, or are able to deliver a solo occupancy type journey. Again, each one of those has sort of limbs that come off it that will have consequences, but each one of those we can look at on an individual basis, and we try to take it as quickly as possible. For us, we want to get that child to school. It's important that they're at school, so we wouldn't dwell on it. But there is no average. So.
That's fine. Jumping in early.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I just add on to that, Councillor Jan, that previously and now there's definitely a higher sense of urgency in those sort of scenarios. So that was something that was an issue where, you know, you've got a parent waiting with a young person at home in the morning and they're not able to get hold of anybody. And our experience as PCF and the parents that we represent is that there is a larger degree of urgency now from the service that we're aligned with. This is a desperate situation that needs to be dealt with right now. We can't wait hours and hours. That's definitely something that we've seen.
Thank you. Councillor
Carthy?
Just to say that this is a significant improvement, but on numbers that the service is dealing with, even success rate of over 99% means that there are families who had a bad experience on one or more days, and we never underestimate the impact of that, whether it's a new parent family to the service, we think they can't trust them being told, or somebody who's had a bad experience in the past, is told it was going to improve, and thinks that that isn't happening. We really do appreciate the stress that puts them through, and the example of how quickly they've been able to resolve the problem. Really encouraging.
Councillor Clancy? I've got everybody on the list, so I will call you in.
Yeah.
Obviously reputationally, anybody looking at Birmingham, thinking of coming to Birmingham, investing in Birmingham, wanting jobs in Birmingham, they've got children that need home to school transport. The reputation was in the mud, no doubt about that. And what we want to do as a city is obviously attract families. That's what we want. And that's whatever that comes with, whether the children have got disabilities, needs, however. Because it's about being in Birmingham, wanting to stay in Birmingham and attracting new people. So looking at that reputational side of events, you're definitely moving in the right way, because that's saying it doesn't matter, because the offer is that we are improving services across the board, and that's you can rely on us, because reputation is everything. While we've got legal in the room, because I've not dismissed that you're there, I just wondered on that reputational aspect point, many parents would have felt that they couldn't take the local authority to court for whatever reason, and that goes across any directorate. Do we have any specific legal cases? And I know we don't talk about specific cases, but do we have any concerns on the reputational side with legal cases that scrutiny as a collective committee should be aware of?
Chair,
If you can't discuss that, that's fine.
just say welcome, because I'm only in week 6. So
Sorry for the heavy
thank
question.
you for the invite to your committee. Just a little bit of background you may be interested in is that my professional background is entirety of local government social care, children's and adult social care, before becoming a director and monitoring officer. So I found this morning extremely fascinating, as I've especially career completely dedicated to creating violence and happiness of any person that I ever come across. So that's my raison d'etre. In terms of the legal aspects, it's probably something that I could share with you outside of this committee. I hope you appreciate I'm still trying to get to grips with the enormity of Birmingham City Council. And I can ask my legal team. I do have a bespoke legal team, and I can ask them about the reputational issues. And also I heard the concerns from Councillor Hughes as well around tribunals, delays, etc. So I can get a more informed view from legal services and perhaps feed that back subject to your views, Chair, either outside of this committee or return at the next meeting with a slightly more update on the legal role and focus.
No, that'd be great and welcome. You know, remiss of me not to welcome you at the beginning. I think it would be great to fit you in somewhere in our work plan, which is quite flexible. I don't know whether that would be the next meeting.
Absolutely, very happy to work with you and Christian. I think Christian sees me sort of like every hour of every day. I was trying to catch up on me. And I'd be very happy to come back, Chair, and I can obviously help fill the gaps that the cabinet member has already indicated around of what does the service look like, and also what are roles such as my service, how do we feed into that, how do we contribute, and also how do we make risk-based or risk-informed decisions as well?
Well, I think it should be, I think it should be intrinsically linked. And I say that because somebody who sat on coordinating committee, often we get legal aspects, not very often. I mean, as members, we see bulletins before full council. And if you go to page 4 or 5 that you don't usually go to, you'll see the update on legal. Now, I always go to it because I do, and that's it. And not many people do, because I'm interested, because actually you can get key information and it does thread through, because we are members of our areas, but as scrutiny, we are city-based, we're city-wide, and that includes everything. We can't delve into everything, obviously, but while you were in the room, and you did catch my attention, so I thought I'd ask.
Thank you. A bit bright today as well, so you can't miss the wearing this bright purple jacket.
But from a legal aspect with what we're talking about in context of today.
I'm very welcome in receiving the views from members of scrutiny, because it's not lost on me that legal services does need to sort of have a refresh. We are one of these services where we have lack of investment, and we absolutely need to develop much better risk-based decision making and be much more proactive in supporting all of our client directorates in the views rather than being put in 11th hour. So I am on a significant programme already of culture change and empowerment and looking at risk-based working, and also it's about working to strengths as well. But people always work to a job title. Personally, I think mine is a little bit distracting. I'm just a person first, and that is largely due to my career in social care. I'm here to help be a person. So it's very much around, I was very interested in listening to the Commissioner's views, and I've spoken to Sue earlier as well. Sue and I have got a lot in common, and know a lot of the same people. And it's about how can I influence my service to bring strength-based focusing to resolutions. So are the right people actually supporting the department? Are the right people in my team actually supporting yourselves? It's not just about job title, actually. We may have specialist skill sets, which are the better people to come in front of you with knowledge, organisational context. So I'm very interested in those views, and I'm sure I'll be coming to many more scrutiny meetings, not just yourself, in seeking those views as well.
Thank
And I
you.
do have the support, I just want to say, I do have the full support of the Chief Executive and Section 151 in order to look at the role that legal services and the governance department on its broader footprint supports directorates and also supports elected members in their making informed decisions. So I just want to publicly say that I do have the full corporate support of the Chief Executive, and I think that's really fundamental for the legal service.
That's brilliant, Jane, and you know, it sounds to me like it'd be really useful to organise a session for members of this committee, and I'm sure that Christian will take that forward and we can have some discussions about that. So thank you very much. I'm going to move on because I've still got a couple of members waiting. So I've got Councillor Hughes, Councillor Maldina and Councillor Morell.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ever so quickly endorse what Councillor McCarthy said, that we must never ever forget the impact that ladies in this service have on the small number of people who are victims of it. I suppose, a polite suggestion to any councillor, not just councillors on this committee, but that if you haven't been to a special school at the end of a school day, I suggest you give it a try to see what an incredibly complex logistical operation this is that takes place twice a day at all of our special schools. It is incredible, and I would just, I'd just quake if I was responsible for directing that.
Even more so this week, Councillor Hughes, sorry for the interruption, because we're having Queensbridge Road resurfaced. So Ufcombe School will be having a fun week this week.
I'll just focus on one concern. It did seem to me that some of the notifications to parents about whether or not they would get to homeschool transport and who's going to provide it, who the guide was going to be, did come rather late, and it wasn't always just because there'd been an appeal about secondary placement or anything like that. I'm kind of half guessing that appeals about secondary placement will have an impact next year. I don't know off the top of my head how many there will be, but there is a backlog with the tribunal service, and that I would have thought will have some impact. Are we working on trying to make sure, it seems to me the parents should ideally know the details before the end of term, rather than a week before the start of the new term. What are we doing to sort that out?
Okay, so I think there's a couple of sorry. Yeah,
just briefly, as I said earlier, the council budget is looming. Do you have faith in the entrenchment and sustainability of what's been done so far, bearing in mind that the potential for budget savings is going to be overwhelming?
Okay, thank you. So firstly, you're absolutely right. You know, 99.5% or 99.9% still means that one or two children didn't make it to school when they should have done. And where that happened and where we could, we telephoned each one of those parents to apologise. Where we had their contact details, we phoned them and we apologised. So we've never taken our eye off the ball there. In terms of the late notifications, that's partly as a result of the way in which the routing for those journeys takes place. So sometimes you don't know the full picture until you know the whole picture. And what I mean by that is there will always be children that have moved into the area late, or there'll be children that have decided that they're going to go to a different school, but their circumstances have changed, or there's going to be issues that change the routing that we have already populated for a particular school. Where that happens, sometimes we're unable to communicate the full picture until quite late on in the day. We made sure that that was always before the start of the school year, but clearly there are sometimes parents that will find out quite late on when that's happening. And that was further exacerbated by postal strikes. And so where we could, we managed to get text messages out. We managed to share things on social media platforms to say, you will find out soon. And again, some of the issues around changing guides, whether they're rolled on, rolled off, moved house, whatever, means that we can't always confirm exactly who that guide and driver is going to be, because we don't know at that point. We want to communicate. And so it's a balancing act for us as to when do we communicate or when do we hear the whole picture. And the view from us was we would much rather remove the stress from the parents to confirm that they're on a route, and actually we can reconfirm later on the exact details of who the driver and the guide is. It was better for us to do that than to stay silent. So partly that's the reason. But again, we're talking about 4,500 children, and it was a small proportion where that happened because those changes occurred. In terms of the appeals, you know, we know it's coming down the track. My view is if you know it's happening, you can plan for it. And if you can plan for it, you can attempt to deal with it. So I'm confident that if we see that coming, we can make sure that the processes are in place to communicate and deal with that as quickly and as promptly and as swiftly as possible. And then the final point about the council budgeting looming, there is a greater requirement for home to school transport every year. We see that happening every year. Your question was, am I confident? I am confident that there are improvements in our plan to help us continue to deliver that in the best way possible. So yes, I'm confident that we'll continue to deliver. We will need to look at how we further improve our service, and we may need to look, well, we will need to look at the policy that's in place that we currently deliver at the moment to make that more appropriate to the environment we're operating in. But I am confident that we'll continue to do it.
John, when you just mentioned a moment ago about where you have contact details for the parents, you rang the parents, do we not hold contact details for all of our parents?
We hold some contact details, but that might not be the phone number. So we
Okay.
will have.
There needs to be some work on that realistically, doesn't there?
And there has been a huge
Yeah.
amount of work that's gone on with that. But again, some parents either A, don't want to give it to us, or B, they've changed their mobile phone number or got a new provider, or they don't use that. those
Okay.
contact details anymore. We have done a lot of work to capture that, and we've actually, on the run up to September, when we were calling parents, contacting parents because of the postal strike, we were using other means to communicate. Where our call agent spoke to a parent, they would confirm that we had the right contact details. Do we have 100%? No.
Okay.
But we're definitely better than we were.
Thank you, John. Councillor McCarthy, you want to come in to answer one of those questions?
Is the new year budget pressure in this area which we're working? That will be the full budget. Thank you.
Councillor Maldina?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And can I just say thank you so much, because I've been intrigued listening to all of your information. And it's clear to me, that's positivity coming, that you are seriously looking at the areas and gaps and failures and ways to improve. So it's really promising from my point of view. Thank you for that. I just have from Councillor Hughes, where he said that we must at some point go and see how the whole thing works. So I can just quickly say something from the point of view that I've actually frontline worked in especially resource centres myself. I've got over 30 years of experience working in all children, young people, all different directions. And I've actually personally seen and experienced how complex it is, the dropping and picking. And I've been at that forefront of it. And it's not easy, and it's quite complex. And I've seen how dedicatedly the team works in taking those children, because I had children with global delays and all different ADHD and all different strengths, that they were struggling, but they were dealing really well with them. There was one thing that I felt that it wasn't anybody's fault. It was complex and it's difficult, but children used to get very distressed with the delays, and I felt that yes, they had to be firm because children needed that boundaries, because obviously you can't be just too chatty because you haven't got time. Do these staff and the guides that are interacting and responsible, you did say the DBS is quite in line now, which is brilliant. And what about their knowledge on the areas of special needs children that they're dealing with? Are these staff employed on the basis of what level of experience and the background are they? So I just want to have an idea of what tends to be the criteria for the people. And the second part of it is, I've also come across parents, not so much from the school, but from casework point of view, are concerned about wanting transportation for their children. And sometimes they don't know how to go about. So they also don't know their rights at times, and the processes are quite complex. There are language barriers and understanding and limitations that they have. Maybe it's not enough good support system around them. Not that they're criticizing the system, and I'm not doing that clearly, but I just want to understand a bit more as to how parents can get better knowledge and understanding around accessing service such as yours, and having a bit more confidence in terms of how to manage if they have any queries. So where would they find this information? Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. So if I pick up the first question, first round of experience of guides. We use 3 pools of guides. So we have Birmingham City Council guides who are employed by the organisation. Some of our transport providers, as part of their contractual agreement with us, they provide guides. And then we have a smaller pool of agency guides that provide us with some contingency should there be sickness, absence, whatever that may be. All of those guides will be operating to a level that we would expect to see. So they will all have understanding of special needs, and they will have gone through the appropriate training to do that. Clearly, some will be much better because they will have 20 years experience, and some may not. But they will all have the minimum expected kind of level of training that we would want to see, and we continually check that with our own guides and then through our contractual agreements that we have with transport providers and with agencies. Again, we can make sure that that's appropriate. But as I say, you know, Mrs. Miggins will have greater than Mrs. Elmsgood because one might have been doing it for 20 years and one might not. Your second question around how parents get better knowledge of accessing that service, I think that comes down to 2 things really. It's incumbent on us to make sure that we communicate that out, and we have things like our local offer page, and there are websites on the Birmingham City Council website that will help explain and signpost the service provision that we've got. But as you may recall in my slides, we talked about some of the feedback loops and focus groups that we want to create. And I think that's another way for us to get out there. We can't expect everybody to just know where it is on our website. We can do the best SEO we've got. We can do the best signposting on our website we can. But actually, some people may not be digitally competent enough to find that, or some people just may not go looking for it. So things like our focus groups and our feedback groups, and working closely with colleagues like Savia and her team and others are the best way for us to get that message out.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Can I just add also, Councillor, the local offer is available in lots of different languages around the accessibility challenge. So, when we're signposting our families there, we always let them know that it is available, and it's really easy at the bottom of the site to just...
they come to yourselves, they'll be able to get all that.
It's one of the areas that we signpost to because we don't do individual cases, but we do explain at the bottom of the local offer website, there's a button and you can change it to different languages. And then all the information is on there, and there's bespoke sections around transport. And also, just to come back to your point, Chair, around the database, that's the conversation that we have had, that there needs to be a bespoke database of all the families that are utilising the service, and that needs to be kept up to date as well. And that really, tying in Councillor's point, should be the point where comms can go out, so you know that it's reaching all of the families that are accessing the service.
And we managed to deliver that and build that in preparation for September. So that was one of the channels that helped us communicate far better. We had a CRM system, a customer relationship management system in place that allowed us to do that.
Clearly, John, we know from when we came over to Woodcock Street to see you that, your real commitment to trying to make sure that that communication is at the very highest level it can be. And we were very impressed with that, actually, weren't we, Des, when we came over? Yeah, I'm going to bring Councillor Merlin. Just on that point, on the communication, I did wonder whether or not you'd managed to get onto the Facebook group, because although the number of contributions were far lower this year around some of the issues, but it would be really helpful for some of those parents that may not access in other ways, just having some real-time information there, or an answer to a very simple question, and it often stops a lot of that advice by social media that isn't perhaps always the best advice. And you know, if you haven't yet, but I would suggest you really do look at that. Councillor Morrell, you're going to have the last word, you'll be pleased to hear.
Well, you'll be surprised to know it's going to be positive. Thank you, Chair, and credit where credit is due. As Shadow Cabinet Member for Children and Young People, one of the reasons I was brought into this role wasn't just because of my passion for children and education, but was because of SEND and the failing home to school transport. And John said earlier, my predecessor was very constructive. Well, I use the analogy of a frog jumping out of boiling water. You've probably heard this before. If you put a frog into boiling water, it jumps straight out. But if you put it into cold water and slowly turn the heat up, it will just sit there and boil to death. And the very reason I was in this role is because we all thought this was going to go to the wall in September. And my job was to be that frog jumping out of boiling water and say, right, this is unacceptable. It is unacceptable. We simply cannot just have a service failing over and over. And as John knows, we've been calling for this to go into a model. So with that said, with that pretext, I'm happy to say, credit where credit is due. However, as the chair has also said, though, the benchmark was pretty low. And interestingly, you'll know the story that was reported in the press. It was my predecessor who actually was quoted in there, not myself. So please don't think that I'm just coming here to rip you to shreds. I can give credit. However, I want to allude to what Councillor McCarthy has said. The 5% of children where there was a failure. 0.5%. Okay. But you do need to still take that into account. Even one child that has had a service failure is a failure. And what I'm concerned about, and what I want reassurances from you is that that is not consistent and it doesn't happen over and over again. When there are problems, we get straight in there and we fix it. Because if you have a service that's failing repeatedly, that's when we have to get in and say, right, there's clear problems here. And my second point would be consistency. Can we not get complacent? Because I don't want this to just be a flash in the pan. We're all doing great now, and then we let the guard down, and suddenly this time next year we're in the same situation again. So perhaps you could explain to the committee what lessons have been learned, and how can we be assured that moving forward we are not going to be in the situation that we found ourselves in previously.
Of course, thank you. So on your first point around the 0.5%, you're absolutely right. And for me, every child is a child, and that's why we endeavour to call every parent and apologise. Make sure that we sort it out for the next day. And that's hopefully why you can see it was 99.5 on day one, 99.7 on day two, 99.9 on day three. So we did make sure that we delivered on that. I think in terms of the consistency and the complacency, for me, as I kind of alluded to on the slides, we're not going to rest on our laurels. So there's two ways for us to ensure that we continue to drive this. And I'm a big fan of incremental change. I've studied how in sports you make that small marginal gain and it all adds up. So, but for us, there are two mechanisms for us to ensure that A, we don't get complacent, and B, we continue to drive improvement. Number one is our improvement journey, our transformation. That's absolutely going into the weeds of each one of those areas and those work streams to make sure that we make those incremental changes and those improvements. There's obviously something around our policy, which I kind of mentioned earlier on, and that's for us, that's how we become sustainable and deliver that. But of course, as you would expect in any operation, you carry out lessons learned. And that was one of the first things we did. As soon as we hit 1st of October, we did a lessons learned exercise across all of our service. We've captured all of those feedback points, and we're building that into our improvement project so that over the next 6 to 12 months, we will continue to pick up those points that we found where, you know, there was an issue here and how we can fix that. Some of that is around operational processes, some of that is around how we communicate, but we will absolutely pick up all of those points and over the next 6 months, I've already given somebody responsibility to do that, so that by June, be in a position where we pick up.
Thank you, Chair.
And just to further reassure Councillor Morrell, we will be on them. You know, so soon if we see any slippage, we'll be there straight away. Definitely.
Get a photo of me and you in their office.
Yeah.
And sorry, one last point I wanted to make. So you're right about it being a low benchmark, and I took that as a compliment. In terms of our performance last year, it's almost a 20% increase on performance levels. But across the rest of the country, I don't know of any local authority that has achieved the levels that we have this year. There was quite a hand on that. So different local authorities have different levels. I don't have the average to hand, but it's nowhere near, it's kind of late 90s. It's not 99.1%. We were late 80s last year.
Okay. No, that's great, John. Just on, you know, we want to help you as well to sustain and continue the improvement with homeschool transport. And just going back to the communication, really, that as elected members, I think if we're aware of any problems, you know, we can field some of that from our casework, from our phone calls with our parents. So it's really about making sure that that communication filters out to elected members as well, because we want to help you guys, and that helps our parents in the same way as well. So, but yes, it's been an absolute pleasure, John, and we didn't think we were going to say that for some years. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to speaking to you again later in the year, and the new Adrian hopefully will be joining you in that, and yeah, to start that process again. But you'll be starting at a much more positive point. So well done, and can you just take it back to the team from us? Well done, and we're really grateful for their hard work. Brilliant, thank you very much. That's fantastic. We're going to move on to the work programme. We have got a couple of proposed changes to the work programme. So if you have a look at your packs, and what is being suggested is that that we move Birmingham Safeguarding Children's Partnership from the November meeting to the January meeting. And if we agree to do that, that means that we can slot in Sendias at the November meeting alongside. Is that staying or is that moving?
And move that to the Children's Trust and then move the plan.
Okay, alongside the input from the Children's Trust, and we will also move the Children and Young People Plan to the January meeting also. So if members are content with that suggestion. Rabia?
Just a question, if we're going into, yes, in December, shouldn't we have them in January so that we know what happens?
Sorry, just say that again for me.
We were just discussing that in December, the yes will be in EPS, so shouldn't we see them in January or February rather than having them again in November and talking about the same thing?
I think that's a really good point, Rabia, but I think it's almost two separate discussions to be had. So I think members are very keen to have those deeper discussions about the service separate to discussions around the APP.
So do both.
Yeah, are you members happy with that?
Yeah.
Yes, lovely. John?
I've said, and I'll stand by what I said, that it's for the commission, the committee to set its own work programme and look at what it wants to look at. There's a process now set in train for the application of the recommendations of the review, including the resetting of Sendias. That process will go forward, and it will lead to proposals being made to council to enact those proposals. I would, it almost marries what Rabia was just saying. I'm sorry, I've not met you in the first name, but the timing of what you do with Sendias, if you bring it through in advance of that, in the absence of anything further than I've said on behalf of the board today, will not be supported, I think, by either a council process, or I don't think I'll be here to engage in that conversation. It's up to you, but I'm not sure what the value of that conversation in those circumstances will be. Whereas there will be a report which you can scrutinise properly coming forward in due course. And I leave it to you. You can carry on as you see fit, but I'm not sure what the value of the conversation will be in the absence of myself or others being represented. And it's clear, I'm saying this, I'm trying to say this constructively, it's clear that there are differing views, but the decisions that are taken through by the board will be brought forward into a proper report.
And that report, John, you say in due course, do you have any timescale for that?
Sue's on the line still, she might be able to give an indication.
She's got a hand up helpfully, Sue.
Yes, well, we're having a couple of working party meetings because we're engaging stakeholders, including the Sendias Management Board, actually, in proposals on, I'm calling it the roadmap to compliance for the service. And we're committed to bringing a paper to the board in January, to the SIB board in January with proposed next steps and recommendations. So that would be really helpful, actually, if that came to January's scrutiny. In terms of if the scrutiny committee, and I do agree with our commissioner that I'm not sure the added value that you can have in unpicking the review, but we could only invite the independent author to come. Obviously, we can't force her to come, so we could invite her to come and discuss her review because it was an independent, commissioned review. I think there's even less value if the review lead and author isn't able or isn't willing to come. So I just wanted to kind of manage some expectations about what you want to achieve in November.
Thanks, Sue. I'm not sure whether we're all on the same wavelength or not, because my understanding of inviting Sendias to this scrutiny is not to unpick the review in that sense. I think it has been many, many years since Sendias came to this scrutiny committee. One of the findings in the Ofsted inspection was going back some time, a lack of scrutiny. I think we've been remiss in not being more aware of what has been happening in the delivery of that service. I think to have Sendias here in November is more about an information gathering on what the service provides to parents, what it has been providing, where it sees itself in the the bigger arena of providing SEND services. And it's, in my mind, it's not about unpicking the report, Sue. I think that is something that we can't do as a scrutiny committee at this point. The review isn't in the public domain. We wouldn't be able to discuss that review until it is in the public domain, or at least until the scrutiny committee have seen that report. So, I am feeling a sense of knockback on having Sendias to this meeting, but I have listened to members of the committee who have raised concerns with me that they feel that we are being prevented from having a discussion with Sendias. And in order to answer those concerns and show that we are open and transparent and have nothing to hide, I would very much like to continue and have Sendias to this committee in November. John?
That's entirely at your discretion, Chair and members, and I completely respect your doing so. I would caution, as the Commissioner, under a statutory direction that if that conversation strays into the work of the board in my absence, please treat that conversation with great caution. Because on behalf of the commission and on behalf of my role, if I think that conversation strays or goes into terrain that I would not agree with, and we've already had an example of that happening this morning, I think that could be very complicated for the city and for the improvement work.
Thank you. Thank you for that, John. I'm looking at the clock and we are out of time. I will take you very quickly, Councillor Morell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to agree with everything you just said, it's absolutely right that Centre has come here to explain their role, but also, to talk about the review because they didn't have their opportunity. And to come back on the comments that John has just said, working in parallel, I think that actually works better because when you're going to the executive with your recommendations, we are our independent body here and get to hear from Sendias. And we actually then get to see if there's any contradictions in the review. And with the greatest respect, John, the fact that you have literally just intervened in this committee with the DCS to say that by pretexting that it's our decision to say that you don't see any value in him, for me, that raises even more red flags and even more reasons why Sendias absolutely should come to the next November meeting.
No, I'm going to stop you there, Councillor Morell. I said very clearly that we need to have Sendias here to talk to Sendias about their work. We won't be able to talk about the review until it's in the public domain because we haven't. You're the only person in this room apart from officers and John that has actually seen that review, which puts us in a very difficult situation. Being very aware of what the Commission's just said to us, being very aware of what Sue has said to us, but that, we do devise our own work programme and we will have Sendias here, but it will be a restricted discussion on, on what we can and can't discuss because we have to protect ourselves and protect others in that process.
I'm happy to write, Chair, to explain my.
Thank you, John. I'm going to move on now. Because that has been very useful, but I don't want to start tripping ourselves up into problems. So we've agreed the work programme. The date of the next meeting is the 30th of November at 10 o'clock in these rooms. Have we got any requests for call-in, committee? No, thank you very much. And any other urgent business?
Sorry, Chair.
Councillor Jan.
Thank you. What was the date? Was it 13th or 12th?
30th of November.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Just very quickly want to raise, apologies, I should have raised this already, that within the work programme, we do need to agree whether or not in 2.2 we invite students. We talk about the period poverty issues and student feedback to that. I would suggest we're quite flexible in our work programme later on in the spring, that we would add to it and put that issue in as something that would be really beneficial for us to discuss.
Which issue?
Sorry, period poverty, where students that gave evidence to the inquiry that was being run a couple of years ago.
I sat on that inquiry. Well, I sat in Health and Social Health Committee last year, and obviously the period poverty was brought to full council.
It was, recommendations were made, but there were discussions around that in terms of the percentage of girls that were not attending school during their period.
Okay.
And we wanted to just revisit that because it wasn't just on that point, yes,
okay.
Not on the whole thing, just on that point, just to revisit that and find out whether or not, any work needs to be done on that. And then secondly, Councillor Maldina attended the Health Committee yesterday and, excuse me, and the inquiry around young people and mental health and COVID was discussed and the terms of reference were set. Was there anything quickly that you could feed back to us, Councillor Medina, or that
I
we
think
needed?
I'll just very, very quickly, because I am more aware of the time, very quickly, I think that one of the things that really stood out was the sort of the waiting list on ADHD, quite extensive. And also followed pandemic, things have gone worse in terms of the load of work and the cases that have come through. However, it was good to hear that several initiatives are in play, getting there, where they have kind of taken other organizations into work alongside collaboratively to spread out the beds and the arrangements with mental health in children. Under 18, rates of suicides have gone high. I did raise a query from my point of view to say, was there any correlation between the list of ADHD not being identified early enough and the level of suicide? So that was from my point of view, I think something that they couldn't answer. However, they did say that there's something they didn't consider and they would like to look into it. Other than that, I think in terms of managing the case, the load is heavy, and they have said that about 40 staff nurses they are employing from South Africa, which was again raised why not employ from within the country and not encourage. And I think several things were explained, and that was quite satisfactory. So I'll just leave it to that.
Thank you, Shayla. The two inquiries are going to be really useful pieces of work. So, you know, we will be having better discussions, if you like, giving them more time. Once those are being developed, and I know that members involved in those are really good. Final point from me is that we also have a request from the Young People Substance Use Service from Aquarius to come to the committee. They came last year and told us about the work they were doing. So if members are happy, we'll slot those into the work programme where we've got a flexible space. Yeah. Thank you very much. And just authority to myself and officers, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for your contribution today. We're just going to wait for the live stream to finish before we all depart.
Sorry.
Thank you.